There's a new function in Magic called DataViewVariables, or DataViewVars. And in this lesson, we're going to learn how to use it. First off, assume we have a program that has some variables in it. Now in this case, I have some real variables or column variables which are from a data source called time clock. Now what I want to do is I want to retrieve all these variables because I want to make a list of what's actually available in this program for one reason or another. So let's see how to do that. First, I need to create a vector to hold these variables. Now if you aren't familiar with vectors, you might want to read up on them. But they're pretty simple to use if you're familiar with vectors from other programming languages. First we need to create a variable. You can press F4 to open up a line and then select virtual because this is not coming from a data source. In other words, it's not part of a file system. And these I usually start with a lowercase v just because. I'm going to call this data names. And the type is going to be of type vector. Now when you have a vector, what you need to do is say what are the cells in the vector going to look like. And you need to do that by creating a model, which you do in the cell model property. And I'm going to say it's a description 40, which is just an alpha 40 field. I happen to know that description names are never over 30, so I could use 30 if I wanted, but I'm going to choose 40 just because. And now I've created a variable vector called data names. Okay? Easy enough. Now, I want to create a handler that is going to fill up that variable. And to create a handler, you might recall, is Control H. I say it's an event. And because really this is just for test, I'm going to say it's a system event, which would be a keyboard event. And it's going to be F12. Okay? So I'm just going to say when the user presses F12, this is going to happen. And this is sort of my standard tester, just because F12 is on the right-hand side of the function keys. It's easy to use. And so I use it. Now, what I want to do is grab all of the data view variables. I do that by pressing F4 and using the update function. And I'm going to update my vector, data names, with an expression, and the expression is going to be DataViewVars 00. Now suppose I didn't have that already coded. I could just press F4 and type in DATA, press Control Shift, and you can see the functions that match so far will show up, and it's DataViewVars. And if I didn't know how to use it, I could just select this text and press F1, and I'll get the help. And the help says basically that I need two parameters. One is the generation. And the generation is always 0 for the current task. If I happen to be getting the variables for my parent task, then I would use a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or whatever. And the second parameter is the option. And it says I can get either the entire data view, just the ones that show up in the form, or just the ones that show up currently visible to the user. So for instance, if I just want the user to be able to see the variables that are visible to them because, presumably they have the rights to see them or there's some kind of a selection criteria going on, that I'd use 2. And the reason for this is that these variables or this function is often used to create reports, and you wouldn't want a user to say create a report that showed passwords or something like that, or financial data that they're not allowed to view. So you can use this to limit the data view vars to exactly what they can see on the screen. Also, you might have some hidden variables inside your data view that a lot of them are just used for tracking or this or that, and they're really not interesting to the user and probably confusing. So use these to limit what you want to show. But for the purposes of this demo, it's just going to be 0, 0. I'm going to grab all the variables. And I press OK. Now what's going to happen is when I press F12, the data view variables are going to go into this vector. But I can't really do anything with them at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press F4 here, because this is the kind of thing you're going to do in a vector. You're going to fill up the vector, and the next thing you're going to do is loop through the vector to display various things or move things into a report or do something or another. So we'll create a loop, which is a block while. And the block while is going to be controlled by loop counter, which always gets set up for us, so I don't have to create a separate variable to control the loop. And I want the loop counter to be less than or equal to the size of this vector I just created, which I can get using the vector size function. And I'll select my vector, and that will control my loop. And just for jollies, of course, I will use the debugger the first time I run this, because I don't really want to wind up in an endless loop and freeze my machine. Although Unipods has great ways to get out of a loop nowadays. And since this is just a tester, I'm going to just use a verify to display to the user what variable it found. So I'll say verify warning, which is going to pop up the Microsoft little Windows box here. And I'm just going to say, okay, what I want is the current entry out of this vector. So how do I get an entry out of a vector? Well, the way I do that is with a vec function, obviously. It would be vec get. And if I don't know how to use it, I could, again, do help, or I can even see down here there's a little tooltip. Vec get blob, numeric, the cell index, return something. Now the something is either going to be a text or a date or a time. I'm the only person who knows what's really in the vector at this point. So I say, well, the vector blob is going to be my data names, which is in. And the numeric is going to be my loop counter. So again, I don't have to create a separate variable for this. And that's pretty much all I need to do. Now I press tab, but normally it's safer to use the show. And that will ensure that I didn't do something wrong in the syntax. I can see that down here the vec get shows red and blue, and it properly capitalized, which means I did everything right. And I say OK, and now I have a verify warning that is going to show me what the vector got. Okay, so let's run it. I press F8 for a syntax check, and this is very important. And now I'll press F7 to run it. And here's my program. You can see that this is just a very simple Control-G browser screen, where the title of every variable is the same as the variable name. And this makes it easy to test, but obviously your program would be more complex. I'm going to press F12 because that's how I set it up. And you can see my warning box comes up and it says user ID because it's found the first field, the second field, third field, fourth field, etc. So I am working through my variables till I get to the end and I stop. So that means my loop was working pretty well.